So what's next then? There's a very small number of you that aren't going into teaching at the moment. If that's the case, then I wish you well with whatever you are going to do. Bear in mind that if you've been awarded qualified teacher status, then you hold that, and that it doesn't expire. So if you want to come back into teaching and start your early career framework, that's possible at a later stage. There will always be a shortage of science teachers, and so there is always potential for you to return to the profession if you wish. For everybody else, I'm very excited that you're going to be changing the lives of children, not always dramatically, not always in a way that you will notice, but every little bit of work that you do affects the lives of the children that you teach, which is one of the reasons why teaching is such a great thing to do. So I don't know about words of wisdom. Here are a few thoughts about what's coming next and what you should perhaps think about doing. Some of you will be starting before the summer, and some of you will be starting in September. Either way, I'm really going to talk about what you might do to prepare for September and what you do in September. If you're starting earlier, then some of those things will probably be a little bit easier and a little bit smoother. Even if you're not going to be employed before the summer, then I would strongly suggest that you do go into your employing school, probably for several days, but you're not being paid. I wouldn't suggest that you're in every day of the week and starting to take work on. If they would want you to do that, then I would expect to be paid for that. But getting a feel for how the school works, finding out a bit more than just what your timetable is going to be, and actually getting to know people, finding your way around, all of those things will make your life easier in September. Other things that you should be thinking about preparing for are, there's a limited amount of things that you can do in terms of planning lessons and stuff and getting ahead with that. I think any work that you do on that is likely to need redoing very soon once you start teaching. So I wouldn't be particularly focused on that. What I would be focused on is what topics you're teaching, what work you've already done in those areas, and where you need to do some more. So topics that you haven't taught before, it would be really good to have a look at those and get a good feel of what's in the national curriculum, in the scheme of work for your school, and in the GCSE curriculum content as well. There's lots of work that you can do on things like GCSE past papers, which will just help to get your eye in, even more so if you're working in a school that does a different exam to the one that you've been familiar with from training. I wouldn't do too much work before September. You've been extremely busy for all of this year. Take some time off, do some other things, and bear in mind that you can't be fully prepared in September. As an experienced teacher, the vast majority of us really worry about September every year. There's a bit of a sense of, am I going to be able to remember what to do? What about classes that I haven't met before? Am I going to get the initial introductions right? Am I going to set routines correctly? Am I going to make the right judgment calls? Do I know what I'm doing? Can I remember what it's like to be working flat out instead of having 6 weeks of holiday? Those are all normal feelings for experienced teachers. And so they're going to be kind of doubled for you because you haven't been through quite this process before. So if you get those feelings of anxiety, I think just accept that that's fairly normal, and you're bound to feel a little bit anxious in most cases. There are a small number of teachers that are absolutely excited about September arriving. I remember one teacher saying to me towards the end of the holiday they really didn't know what to do and they wished the holiday was shorter. I can't say I've ever had that feeling. All right, it will be okay in September. You'll get some things wrong, but you'll get most things right, and the things that you do get wrong are relatively easily fixed. Okay, so what about that start in September? It will be a massive blurry rush. There'll be an inset day or two before the kids are in, and sometimes you might just have year 7 the first day that children are back, but that is going to pass in a blur. Again, if you haven't been employed before the summer, there'll be things that you have to do, like safeguarding stuff, maybe if it hasn't been done online. Definitely kind of some introductory things for all of the new staff, either newly qualified teachers or experienced teachers that are joining the school. There'll be some department stuff. You'll have some idea what's going on. Some stuff won't make sense to you. That will all pass in a blur, and then suddenly there'll be children in front of you, and it will just be you and 30 children who don't know you, you don't know them. What you're going to do next. Again, some of you might have that transition eased by starting earlier, or you're in your training school, but for many of you, that's going to be a fairly intense experience. Okay, so my advice would be keep things really simple for at least the first couple of weeks. It isn't like taking over a class midway through the year. The most important thing is that you're establishing routines for the rest of the year. If the children don't learn anything new in terms of science curriculum content over those first couple of weeks, or even the first month, I personally, as a head of department, would not have a problem with that, as long as what they were learning was the behaviour for learning, the routines that are going to mean that they do well for the rest of the year. The work that you do on that in September will massively repay in terms of the progress of the children later on in the year. If you try and do something complicated, sophisticated, clever in those first couple of weeks, then you're not going to have the capacity, whilst you're managing that, to do the things that you need to do to establish routines. So I would suggest you keep things really simple and you don't worry too much about progress through the scheme of work. Okay, obviously you're teaching some content during that time, but you can revisit it later. Okay, so think ahead. This is the work that you can do over the summer. Think ahead about what those key ideas in those routines are. How do you want the children to come into the lesson? How are you going to manage the starter? Does the school have a system for that? Do they already have starters set up? Are they using something like Carousel that generates questions at the click of a button? Do you need to generate the questions? Are you trying to keep them busy so they've got something to do whilst you're settling the class and sorting out problems? Are you going to be sure that you can set something that's not going to get them stuck straight away? Again, if it's too easy but they're expected to do it, that's going to work all right. If it's too hard and whatever your expectations are, they can't do it, then you're going to run into trouble. So you've been through all of that during the training year. Just think on the basis of everything you've learned so far, how are you going to do it in your class in that school in September? Are you going to do practical work? With some classes, the answer is almost certainly yes. Which practicals? How are you going to organise them? Ideally, you'll know what your room looks like and all those sorts of things. And one of the great things about next year is that you'll almost certainly do almost all of your teaching in the same room. Most of you won't have had that this year. That's a massive improvement. Makes life so much easier. How is that room laid out? How are you going to sort out kit for practical? Yeah, all of those sorts of things. What's the circulation of the kids through the room? Get those things sorted in your head, and then that's work that you don't have to make up on the spot when you start teaching. With written tasks and things like that, how are you going to organise that? Again, the school may well have a system, but you need to know what it is, and if they don't have a system, you need to know what your system is. So are they writing in books? Are they taking their books home? Are they keeping them in the class? What are you doing with stuff that they want to stick in the books? Are you gluing it in? Where's the glue? Are your books hole punched with a treasury tag in, which is quite a good way of doing it? In which case, have you got all the stuff? It's all those kind of logistical things that will make a big difference to how those first couple of weeks go. It matters less exactly how you introduce yourself to the class. I think a lot of you probably will be thinking about, what's the first thing you're going to say, how are you going to introduce yourself, how are you going to set your expectations. Yes, you need to set expectations. Yes, you need to be clear and confident at the beginning of that first lesson. But actually, it's the whole of the first 2 or 3 weeks that matter, not exactly what you say to them the first time you meet them. Okay, so think about consolidating routines, establishing the behaviour that you want. That's the thing that you need to focus on at the beginning of the year. Okay, so there's a whole load of things to think about there. I'm sure it will be fine. If it's not fine, then that's what you have to work on through the rest of the year. Yeah, not every class, doesn't matter how good you are, how experienced you are, not every class will work really well for you straight away. So don't feel it's a failure if a class is, difficult to manage. Talk to your colleagues in school. They know that you're inexperienced. They can't all be there all the time to support you, but support is available in school. So seek it. And remember that managing a class so that they're working really well, there's no magic bullet to that. Yeah, silver bullet. You're either gradually working on improving their behaviour, or their behaviour is gradually getting worse. It isn't going to be a sudden transformation one way or the other. At any point, if it's not going right, then restate expectations, and work hard on sticking to your guns. It can often be a bit of a war of attrition. You need to be stronger than they are. You need to be, by being more consistent than they are, by knowing more about what's happening than they are. And very gradually, even difficult classes will start to head in the right direction. If you get to the end of your first year and you've had a class that have been difficult all year, but you haven't been defeated by them, then that's a victory. Okay, so don't feel that you're failing because you have a class where the behaviour is not as good as you would like it to be. All right, if you're working at it, then that's what matters. Okay, what about looking further ahead then? So you've got 2 years for the ECT process, and then when that's signed off at the end of 2 years, then you're a qualified teacher for the rest of your life. So that's that first bit done. I would suggest that you don't want to take on very much over those first 2 years. There's a lot to do as part of the early career framework on top of all of the stuff that you need to do as an inexperienced teacher. If you're going to take something on, take one thing on and only one thing. So if you want to do science club, that's great. If you're doing science club, don't get dragged into other stuff. If you want to do D of E, that's great. If you want to do D of E, do that, get involved in that, but then say no to science club. And that might be something that you need to have a conversation about early on at school, because there might be several people that want you to get involved in the thing that they're doing. And once you've said yes to one thing, you want to be clear that you're okay to say no to everything else. All right. At some point, there will be a question about, are you going to stay in the same school? There will be a question about, are you going for promotion? I don't think there's any right or wrong decisions about any of that. It is okay to move school early in your career. When the NQT process was 1 year, it was not uncommon to move after the end of that first year. Yeah, most people stayed for longer than that. But if you've got a good reason for moving, and that might simply be that the school isn't a great fit for you, then I don't think that's a problem. Science teachers will always be in demand, so you're not in a situation where because you moved or have a slightly unusual career, you're not going to get jobs because there are lots of other people applying that are good, that don't have that slightly more erratic background. So I wouldn't worry about that. Being in the right school with the right kind of family circumstances is the most important thing for sustaining your science career. I guess in an ideal world, you might want to stay in the same school for 2 or 3 years, and then you might feel like, well, everybody knows I was here when I was wet behind the ears and I was the new boy or girl or whatever. So at that point, you might want to move. But some people stay in the same school for their entire teaching career, and that can be very successful and work very well. It's up to you what you want to do. I think if you're really ambitious, then you probably do want to move school fairly early on, just because you need to see more than one school and you need that breadth of experience. But don't feel that you have to do that. At some point, you might want to take on additional responsibility. Key Stage 3 coordinator is often a first thing to do. Head of department might be something that you want to do at some later stage, but don't underestimate how much work that is. Occasionally in some schools, because of turnover, opportunities like that come quite early, in which case I'd be really careful about saying yes. You want to be absolutely sure that you're totally on top of your classroom teaching before you take on anything major, like a head of department role or a head of year role or something like that. But when you feel that you're ready, when you feel that you can manage to keep your classroom teaching going without it requiring lots and lots of attention outside the time when you're in the classroom, and you want to take something else on, then do. I think it's helpful to think about whether you want your career to go down the subject route, so head of department, or the pastoral route, so towards head of year. In either case, if you're wanting to go beyond that, then there's an argument for getting experience of kind of managing people, and there may be opportunities to do that. Don't forget that being a curriculum mentor in school for either trainee teachers or early career teachers is a really good way to get some quite specific experience of managing people to put on your CV. Yeah, so that when you're applying for a head of department's job or a assistant head's job or something like that, you already have experience of managing people in a relatively confined context. Okay, I'm sure one of you at some point will be a head teacher or whatever, in which case I have no advice for you. Good luck with that. It's a really, really important job. If that's what you want to do, then you can make a huge impact by being a successful head teacher or member of a senior leadership team. Equally, if what you want to do is to stay in the classroom, then it's changing a little bit, but teaching, once you develop through the pay scale, is pretty well paid. And if you want to stay as an established classroom teacher, then I think that's a really good thing to do as well. Just bear in mind that when you get up the pay scale, it then becomes a bit more difficult to move schools, because if a school is looking for a classroom teacher, it's a lot cheaper for them to have somebody who's early in their career than somebody that's at the top of the pay scale. But staying put in the same place and becoming a really effective classroom teacher is a really good thing to do. I can see the appeal of that as well. Okay, so whatever you choose to do, I don't know whether any of that's useful, but those were my thoughts really. Whatever you choose to do, remember that the work that you do, you won't have day after day after day where it's obvious that you're transforming children's lives. The moments when somebody kind of changes in front of you and becomes a transformed person, those kind of wow moments in teaching are incredibly rare. I can think of one or two occasions in my career over like 20 years when I could genuinely say, oh yeah, this child has been transformed by the experience that they've had in this setting. Most of the time what you're doing is tiny incremental improvements, but remember, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. If you're taking those single steps with the children that you're working with day after day after day, they will go 1,000 miles. Okay, really, really good luck to all of you with whatever you're doing next. And I'll let you get off now and I'll stop talking. Thanks.